Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
And thank you, Peter, for having me on. Yeah, I think we did meet over Twitter exchanges, and then also maybe some Facebook bits as well. But I was, me and many other people in the Rally Point Alpha and Gay B crowd were big fans of your write-up a while ago now, I guess, at this point, about the culture wars. And that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, although certain things have now pressed themselves in a higher plane of urgency. But the thing I wanted to talk about today, and actually, let me just check real quick, how much time should I take for this initial bit of exposition, perhaps?
I recommend anywhere from 10 to 25 minutes.
Oh, okay, that's quite a bit. Okay, let's see how far I get in doing these chunks. I don't want people to get too bored, but I'll start with let's do a part one and part two. Okay, so part one is about choice, consequence, and meaning, and part two will be about Moloch and the system of the world and what this moment teaches us about that. Okay, so part one, I think the best way to put it is that I'll just set a little background. My contention is that here in the West, we have a theory of individualism, and we have a philosophy of individual rights, kind of all of the sort of ground plane philosophy for our society and for our politics and our personal philosophies. They're really grounded in this idea that we are free. We're individuals. We are free. We have freedom. And if you really think about it, for the most part, we don't go too far in asking, well, what is freedom really? We just sort of say, well, I have choice, and therefore I'm free. I mean, I think most people would find that to be a fairly, not an unreasonable position to take, right? I can decide, I can be whatever I want to be. I can be a firefighter, I can be an astronaut, I can go and just sit in a hut all day long. I have choices, and therefore I'm free. And so this first part is really looking into what is a choice, most importantly, what is a consequential choice, and how that ties into actual meaning in life. So when we look at kind of generally kind of modernity in the West here, we realize that, of course, I'm free, but I mean, I live within institutions. I live in a big city. Even if I live out in the countryside, I'm very aware I'm part of political structures and legal structures. I'm somewhat bounded. I really can't say I'm completely free, obviously. But if you really start thinking about it more and more, and you look at what is it that people do in their daily lives, well, for the most part, people are pretty boring. They have a very set routine. You could be a farmer out on 25 acres. You could be a city, some person with a job in the city. But people have routines, and those routines are actually quite fixed. And even given that they could do something different on a given day, they don't do that. So this idea that we have choice and so we're free. Well, if that's the case, most of us are not manifesting that freedom in any meaningful way. So when we look at these large structural institutions, it's not just they limit our choices. It's like today I could go to some place I've never been in the city and do something completely different, but I'm not gonna, right? And the reason I'm not gonna is because my preferences are shaped, and my life is shaped by more than just hard constraints of like, I can't do this or that's illegal, or there's a thing in my way so I can't go over there. There's a fence, I can't go see that thing. It's actually that we are guided generally. So I would say that the big thing here, the concept here is that people generally, even though they believe themselves to be free, even though they believe that freedom is manifest in a large plurality of choices, for the most part, they make the same choice every single day. And this is a critical component. That optionality, though, the perception of that optionality is a huge part of the Western psyche. And I would say that part of it is because it's so individualistic. It's like, I don't have to do anything for you. I don't have to, you can't make me. How many times you hear kids saying that? You can't make me, right? And this same idea, it's all centered around the idea that we make these choices, and my choice is mine, and that's the center of my agency, is that I can make choices. And in fact, it goes a little bit further, which is that, I have choices and you have choices, so we're gonna be civil to each other, and we can pretend our choices don't impact each other. I can see movie A, you can see movie B. I call it tomato, you call it tomato. and we can get on with our lives. So that there is a stability, a social and civil stability that emerges from, even if people don't manifest those choices by making different choices, that at least the belief that we all have our individual choices lets us be civil towards each other, lets us coexist, right? We can believe that we are actually not in relationship. But I say this is complete fiction, right? And what coronavirus has shown for us is, well, let's put it this way. Let's say you're driving down the road and you're listening. Let's say it's beginning of March or late February. So think about that time, right? There was this is no worse than the flu. This is a liberal hoax to hurt Trump. There's any number of different things, right? And so you're driving down the road and maybe you see Facebook posts or you've seen messages from other people, friends of yours, who say, oh no, this is really bad. This is a pandemic, exponential curves, yada, yada. So you're driving down the road and you hear on the radio some little news segment that says, the first case of so-and-so was reported in our city. And now the government's debating whether or not to go into lockdown or something else or whatever, or do we need to have masks, whatever. And so you're driving down the road and you're at a stoplight and you're listening to this. And now you have a choice. And your choice is, do I turn left and go to the store and buy some hand sanitizer, just in case, because this thing could be real? Or do I go straight and just kind of keep going home? Because like, whatever, I'm sure when something is really bad, they will tell me, and we'll figure it out, I guess. So that's the choice. And the interesting thing about coronavirus is that at that point in time, no one actually knew, right? There was sort of this liminality that was open right then, because if spaceships descended from on high and said, hey, everyone, this is a global pandemic, you all should take this seriously, and they blinked out of existence, we would all be aligned and say, okay, you know what, the liminal window, it snapped. We all believe this is a bad thing. Let's go do this thing. But it wasn't that. It was like, well, is it, isn't it? Is it a liberal thing? Is it a real thing? Is it science? Is it whatever? So in that window, people had to make a real choice. And I call this a consequential choice, because if you don't take it seriously, and you're well within your rights not to, you could go straight and continue as you've always done, because inaction is still a choice. And you keep going to bars and you keep going, like, here in Austin, which is where I am, 70 people from the University of Texas, 70 students flew down to Florida to, keep doing their Florida party thing. And half of them now have coronavirus, right? So they made a choice to just carry on. That choice had a consequence, right? You could also decide, wait, maybe I should take this seriously. And just in case, I'm going to go and just get a little extra hand sanitizer, get a little toilet paper, or whatever it is, right? I'm not actually modeling out what this thing really, how pandemic really plays out, but I'm going to at least try to maybe get some hand sanitizer, just so I have it with me, just be a little bit safer. So you make a choice. Even inaction, even status quo is a choice. And here's the kicker. That choice has a consequence, right? Because 2 weeks from now, we're going to find out how well you did. Now, can you imagine walking down the street, if someone jumps in front of you with a gun, points it at you and says, hey, give me all your money? You have a consequential choice there too, right? Because depending on what you choose, a consequence, a very significant consequence presents itself to you. But with the case of coronavirus, there's this lag, right? You make the decision and you're kind of fretting about it and you're kind of like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. And like maybe 2 weeks later, you find out, oh crap, I just passed something on to my, aging parents, or oh my God, I think I gave that to my friend because I went to that party and then I also went to this other party. Holy crap, right? The consequence is unavoidable, right? The virus itself, the SARS coronavirus 2, doesn't care whether you read Fox News or watch CNN or whatever. It does what it does. So this idea that people now have to make a choice, a real choice, and that there's a consequence, an unavoidable, non-narrative, narratable away consequence, and then there's a lag. Super interesting, because that lag forces this liminal window to be open for quite some time. And in this context, I want to sort of just highlight that when you are faced with this, you might also, if you have a little bit of self-awareness, you step above yourself and you say, you know what, why is this particular decision harder for me than all the other decisions in my life? Because look, in my life, I've decided to go on this trip, or I decided to get married, or I decided to, change jobs, or I decided to move to this town, right? Any number of things have been decided. I make decisions all the time, right? And it turns out, no, you make choices, but really they're expressions of preference. Most people in stable, let's say middle class, Western countries, I would hope, maybe for not many people, but I hope this moment presents to them a bit of self-awareness that this choice is unlike most of the other choices that you have been making in your life. And in fact, this is a real choice. This is a real decision, a consequential one. most of the other decisions and choices you make are basically totally bullshit. It's like, what color car do you want? What color is your hat? Well, okay, there's a whole thing around that. But like, what toppings you want on your pizza? That's not a choice. That's not freedom. That's preference. And the reason you want some new, fancy pizza is because you saw the freaking ad on TV last week, right? So the idea here that not just a few individuals, but every single person has to make a consequential choice that's like life and death consequences, and they have to do it all kind of at the same time. And there's this gap when we find out how well we did. And then the really interesting kicker is there's a social aspect to it too, which is if I'm the only one making a consequential, making this decision, and I decide one way, but all of y'all decide a different way, we have a worse outcome than if we all decide the same way, right? If we all decide this is a hoax and we carry on with the economy doesn't crash. A bunch of people are going to die, maybe more than they should have, but the economy doesn't crash. If we all decide, holy crap, this could kill everyone, this pandemic, we all lock down, the economy crashes, but fewer people die, right? And that fewer person dying could be you. It could be a loved one or a friend, right? So there's a prisoner's dilemma aspect to the social aspect of this thing. That's just absolutely, I won't call it perfect, but it's like amazing that we get all of these different little bits filled in terms of imposing a consequential social choice on people. And again, it puts this in stark contrast with what I call the as if choices that most people kind of stumble through life making and believe that it makes them free. Because the way that this game, I'm one of the people in kind of the game B movement, if you will, mostly because I say I am, right? I guess it's one of those movements. And so the game A world has been really, really good at giving people stringing them along with a series of small as if choices that are really just preferences, but that have no downside consequences. In fact, we vend a lot of things to people to insulate them from the consequences of bad decisions. So ultimately, these little decisions kind of ratchet them into almost like a lobster trap or something else. It kind of funnels them into a part of the phase space where ultimately they're screwed. Like their long-term optionality, strategic optionality is compressed, but it feels like real choices all the way along the way. And that's the game. That's the trick. That's the lobster trap, right? So like, do I take a little bit of extra credit? I get another extra $5,000 if I take this credit card, right? Or do I get this upgrade on this car? I mean, it's just at the edge of what I came into the dealership with my budget, but I could, I could do this, extend the payments out a little bit. All these little decisions, right? They're there to give people in the moment a way to buy some risk hedging, but what they're trading away is larger optionality. And those little as if choices, those little preference things kind of glide people into that. And that's really where the majority of people are quite stuck. Venkatesh Rao has a wonderful thing called the Gervais theory. And he holds it in contrast to like the Peter principle or the Dilbert principle. And the Gervais theory was his structure of what corporate America or really corporate structures look like. And you have sociopaths at the top, and you have losers at the bottom who know they will never reach the top. They're just phoning it in. They're doing the minimum thing possible to get a wage. They're playing the game just as the game's trying to play them. The people at the top are leading. They're making consequential choices. They're really looking out for themselves most of the time, but they know they're both of these are liminal, and they both have made their choices to how they're going to play the game. And in the middle is a tier of clueless people who facilitate the dream for the people down here and the people in the middle they could ever become at the top. And they also help soften the blow of the bad decisions of the people at the top. So this clueless tier in the middle are the ones who exist in a state of non-liminality. And I would say that the vast majority of middle-class Westerners who, let's say, they do all the things, right? They take out a mortgage, they listen to the news, they try to get their kids to have good grades, to go to school, they try to figure out how to save up in this college education saving fund to pay for super expensive college. It's just getting more and more expensive. They do all these things because those are what you're supposed to do. But they don't ever really ask, why should college be 10 times more expensive now than just when I went to school? They don't ask all these different kinds of things, right? They don't ask, how does the money actually get made? Where do the $2 trillion come from? I thought we couldn't come up with 300 million for this other thing that I like, right? So they don't actually understand how the system works. They're there just to continue the fiction of the American dream, let's say. And I'm American, so a lot of this is real contextualized in the culture of America. But this idea that people have a real choice when it comes to coronavirus, everyone's got to make the same choice. It's consequential, highly consequential. This might actually get people to realize, oh, you know what, compared to this set of things, like, do I participate in the destruction of the American economy or the Western economy? Like, do I contribute to this and intentionally and explicitly? That's a real choice I get to make. And if I have to make that decision and that choice feels totally unlike a lot of these other choices I'm making, right? And I'm hoping that it gets people to snap out of that reverie of the clueless middle and realize, you know what, I'm smoking crack. Do I really have a shot at getting beyond middle manager and making it into this league over here? Do I really have a shot at making out of the middle class? If I do all these things that they tell me I'm supposed to do, is my kid really going to get into Harvard? You know, I hope it snaps people out of the as if decision making, as if choices, and hopefully maybe out of this idea of as if freedom, right? Because real freedom is not about just picking sausage or pepperoni on your pizza. Real freedom is not about a bunch of bullshit choices. Real freedom is having the optionality, having the ability, the agency, and the opportunity to live a meaningful life. And so the other piece of this, tied to this, and I'll end phase one with this thought. One of the John Vervaeke talks about the meaning crisis. I think that people making a lot of as if choices is sort of like, when they had the microbeads in in all the hair products and stuff, the exfoliating like little microplastics that were going out and like filling fish bellies. When they cut open the fish, you see the inside of the fish is filled with this crap, right? The fish thought it was food. It wasn't really food. It was killing them. It was out of malnourishment. They starved to death, even though they were constantly eating. I think that's a perfect metaphor for the kinds of as if choices that crowd people's lives, the as if decisions they have to make. There's really not that many decisions people really need to make because the big decisions are the ones with consequence. So if a decision or a choice doesn't change your long-term consequence, it doesn't matter. It's not really a choice. Just go with whatever, right? So I think the key thing here is that because people have been just making bullshit preference choices and not real consequential choices, there's a lack of meaning because there's a lack of endowment effect. You know that whether you pick pepperoni or not, whether you drink the Bud Light or not, you're still not going to get all the hot chicks in the beer commercial, right? You know, you can go and buy the cool car. It's not going to put you into the expensive neighborhood of town, right? All of these kinds of things ultimately create that meaning crisis because meaning comes from people being able to make consequential choices, owning those choices and seeing them through to their consequence. And then actually cranking that loop and saying, I actually have a part in the trajectory of my life. So, okay, I'll wrap up phase one or part one with that. Thoughts, feedback, Peter?
Yeah, do you want to jump into some Q&A? Or do you
let's go ahead and let's take a couple questions and see what we got here.
Sure. So if anyone has any questions, you can write in the chat box. I have some questions right now, which I'll warm Peter up with. And again, if you want me to read it, just indicate that in the chat. So yeah, I really liked all that. And then the phrase that came to mind, I think it'd be good to run with it, is that this whole thing is an opportunity for freedom. And so do you like that specific phrase? And you think that's going to be encouraging for people to think that way?
I think that might be a narrative bridge too far right now, but I would say it's an opportunity for meaning. It's an opportunity to like I maybe encourage people to be a little bit more intentional in self-aware and reflecting on why they're doing the things they're doing. Right. Because this is a consequential choice. This is not just choosing which color you want in your car. This is actually something quite important. How are you getting to that decision? And as they walk through it, and as they walk that pattern of actual explicit intentional decision making, they're going to realize, oh, why don't I have to do this more often? Well, maybe they won't realize, but we should encourage them to think about, why don't you do this more often? Why do you not have the skills to do an explicit sense-making loop around something like this? Mm-hmm. Is it either A, your life is so privileged and comfortable that you don't have to, or is it B, that you're basically chicken in a feedlot? You don't have to, and that's bad. It's not safe.
Right. And how are you personally in this consequential? We originally called it the consequential leg, then the consequential gap. How are you personally like operating in this state?
Well, I would give myself about a C- because I have a full-time job trying to run a business and company, and I got to steer that thing through various things. I mean, maybe not C- there. I should give myself a little bit more. We have to learn to forgive ourselves. This is one of the things that we have to do here, right? Is treating the whole body, treating the whole mind, treating all these things and our egos as well. So maybe I'm not doing C-, but I don't think I'm even doing A-. I think I could do a lot better. the way I'm trying to track it is I do try to spend some part of my day understanding the broader scope of what's going on. I spend some part of my day talking to people and just asking questions like, how are you thinking about this? Here's what I've got. I'm very open about what I don't know. And I ask and I try to get input from people. And even within the company, trying to think about how do we model what the economy is going to look like? Is it going to be a complete disaster? Is it going to restart? Are we going to go to war with China and then we have a wartime economy and we should go try to get some of those sweet defense contracts? Like, what is the thing that I do to take care of the people I'm responsible for, right? So there's just, for me, it's just asking more questions more intently and more explicitly reaching out and looking for what I would call the, oh gosh, I had a cute term for this a year ago, but I've forgotten it now. But it's this, it's almost like creating a negative capacity in your mind. Basically carving out a way to say, no, you're full of shit. And just have that person on your left shoulder all the time, right? Constantly saying, here's the thing you don't like and you hate it, but what if it was right? And now I generally run with that anyway. Like generally that person's always there. But in this case, I have to more intentionally, explicitly manifest that person or that cognitive center, because I don't think, we're in this liminal zone. I think the mainstream narratives about this virus are bullshit. I think the mainstream narratives about what the consequences might be are bullshit. Because what I realize is that if even any of these are partially true, the consequence must be that there is state level, massive diplomacy things happening right now to avoid World War III. And if those things collapse, and I do not trust the leadership and the structure of leadership we have at the top of the American government, certainly, and I certainly do not trust the leadership of the Chinese government, because in this game, it's a Game of Thrones. It's a game of states. If the Chinese and Russians have a chance to gang up and completely cripple America, they absolutely will. Instantly, they will. And we've done such a great job as American leadership in galvanizing NATO and all of our classic allies, right, in the last 3 years, that I'm sure we're gonna have a super coherent response to that kind of shit. So like that's kind of stuff I try to reason about, but then I try to, I'm just trying to run multiple loops at multiple different levels. None of it makes me feel particularly good, especially as a Chinese person here an actual person from Wuhan. Originally, I was born there. Here in America, where obviously, racist sentiments have been stoked for political purposes for the last 20 years. So no, it's not great, but I'm just trying to hold open the possibility spaces. So I'm looking at everything, no matter how unpleasant it is.
Right. So we have some questions popping up in the chat. Rhea, would you like to read your question to Peter?
Sure, I would love to. Hi, Peter. Thanks for being here. My question, and maybe the wording is not as clean as I'd like it to be, but do you feel like this situation with COVID will raise awareness for, / do you think that we're even capable of making intentional consequential choices where our consequences aren't seen through for like another 10 or so years? So something like climate change, where the choices that we're making now, we won't really see the consequences for years and years to come, whereas like we're struggling to make choices where we won't see the consequences for another 2 weeks. Right.
Very good question. I think there's, I hope, well, it's the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, right? And if in this process we restore a little bit more credibility for mathematical modeling, for data-driven decisioning, if we put a little bit more rigor into how science and the public sector or intellectual, like public intellectuals or whatever, how these scientists hold journalists accountable for crafting mainstream narratives. Because I think that all these different things, we have institutional breakdown on these levels. That's why we can't do sense-making decisioning on these long timeframes. And I'm hoping that currently what it does is sort of like when a train locomotive backs up and then pulls forward, right? I think right now it's a backing up moment. So we get a little bit, at least get a couple of the first rail cars hooked up to the locomotive, of actually having, data-driven, explicit, intentional science and modeling around long-term consequences and broad consequences. And I'll cite two things. One is I was having a conversation with Tristan Harris, and he was just pointing out that we shouldn't give ourselves too much. Well, maybe he wasn't quite saying this, but saying we should expect, it should be natural that people have trouble with this kind of thing, because our primate brainstem and our emotional centers and all these things, the sense-making loop of human brain fits inside a human brain, right? And nature usually doesn't over-engineer, so it's designed to make consequential decisions roaming the African savannah, right? Is this thing going to kill me? Is this thing coming at me really fast? Does it look like it has sharp teeth? I'm going to go run, right? There's like these kinds of consequential decisions. You don't have to sit there and say, yeah, you know, I drew some stuff on a cave wall and I'm going to give it 2 weeks and we're going to see what happens. Like, you don't run OODA loops like that, right? You basically, you know, you throw pointing things at things to eat them, or things with pointing things come at you and you run. And that's your general, like, that's the OODA loop. That's the frequency or the time frame, the characteristic wavelength of time that you have to solve for. So the fact that we are able to build collectives to integrate over a broader period of time, over a more complex set of phenomena, is amazing in and of its own self. To try to do this over 10 years, that's a bigger leap. And you know, I think this is a first step to getting there. But we've got to get people into at least running that just 1 week, 2 week loop. That'd be great, right? The second thing, though, to keep in mind is that we have to, it's not just about journalism and the sense-making infrastructure for all of society. It's also about the broken and corrupt institutions, right? And you see this a little bit with the Trump versus the World Health Organization bit, right? And I'm generally, I don't know if you follow me on Twitter, I'm not the world's biggest fan of Donald Trump. I'm pretty far down the ladder there, but I think he's absolutely right to go after the World Health Organization because they absolutely took the corrupt Chinese government at their word, okay? Even as they were burning tens of thousands, like they were cremating thousands of bodies or tens of thousands of bodies a week in Wuhan. And they were telling everyone else, well, I don't know, is there human-to-human transmission? You know, like, no, come on, right? So this is the sort of thing that it's right to hold those accountable for, but it shows that, and this is going to be where, you know, I bring in the Eric Weinstein point, that basically since the 70s or 80s, we've had these hollowed out institutions that kind of do the theater. They engage in some kayfabe, some theater of, oh, well, we're the blah, 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 and we're doing these things, and we have this meeting, and we did this. It's like, hold on a second. We can't even figure out, you know, where this thing came from. You're telling me you can't even tell me if there's human-to-human transmission, what those rates look like. What are you doing, right? So the problem is, if we want to put science forward, science has got to clean up its act, right? And the broken and corrupt institutions of academia, the funding vehicles. I mean, like, I worked with National Science Foundation, with DARPA. I've worked with many institutions here. And when you really get in there and you go to the backside of the kitchen or of the restaurant, you see a kitchen, you see how the sausage is made. It's not pretty, right? There's you know, we talk about the revolving door of lobbyists and things like that in Washington, but there's a revolving door of academics going to these institutions, becoming program managers, one hand washing the other. They see their grad students, these other programs, they send money over there. There's a whole general kind of corrupt bureaucracy whenever you get humans into a certain state. And so if we want to actually do 10-year level decisioning and sense making for things like climate change, which I think we absolutely have to do, science has got to get better too. It's not just about bullshit journalism or fake news or idiot citizenry who are uneducated. Is that the institutions of science and academia are rather corrupt at this point in time. Long answer for a very short but very good question. Sorry.
And just to plug, Pat Ryan did a talk related to that, which is on the YouTube channel. I can send you that Peter, if you're interested. Raven, you had a similar question. Would you like to follow up with it?
Sure. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. This was amazing. I was just on your Twitter this morning looking at all of the stuff that you were posting.
I've gone pretty hard. I've gone pretty hard down the rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, I was also wondering about the ability for us to see this event through, see the kind of lag in our ability to make decisions, and apply that to more wicked problems such as climate change, where we have this increased lag. But the other question I put into the chat was also about like communities that have modeled accurate sense making. Like, I know that a lot of tech companies like instituted like remote work very early on in this process. And I know that you mentioned like the OODA loop. So there's a lot of startups that already have these models kind of in their businesses. So I was kind of wondering about like what communities and their kind of psychotechnology or organizational structures have succeeded in making good choices, and how you think that might impact the future evolution of culture.
Okay, fun question. So you're absolutely right that the tech companies seem to have moved a little bit earlier. In fact, my company, in the very first week of March, the first Thursday is when we told everyone to work from home for the rest of the month at least. And then part of that was because we were here in Austin, and South by Southwest was about to descend upon us the next week. And I said, I'm not even messing around, right? However, I do think there are communities and subgroups or subcultures that have been doing better sense making or engaged in higher quality sense making around this. But I think that we should be careful about two possible anti-patterns. One thing we don't want to do is just match against like, oh, tech companies, right? Or any kind of standard or easy taxonomy of people, of tribes, and of coherent structures or coherent movement and sense-making structures. I think those will potentially drag in a lot of additional variables that are proxies, right? So for instance, if you're at the top of a tech company, or if you're in one of these tech companies, their organizations tend to be a little bit flatter. They tend to be connected to VCs, which are broad dissemination nexuses for billionaires and other people who are truly, truly in the know on secret stuff, right? So there's just almost like it's an unfair competition a little bit because they have closer access to the edge of whatever is known globally. So by that structure, so it's not like they do better OODA loops. In fact, their OODA loops may be piss poor. There may be a lot more tribal groupthink there, but they just happen to be closer to the upstream. So I want to make sure we don't inadvertently alias along those kinds of boundaries. And what I would say is that if I were to run a real program to analyze and look at what are the communities that did good work, and I think the verdict is also too early to tell, right? The jury's still out on who did a good job or didn't. But I would be generally biasing towards looking for emergent patterns of communication and connection as the topology from which I would then cluster and group people, not on any other kind of, I mean, I wouldn't not label them by their physical location and by their place of work and things like that, because those are strong network affiliation kind of factors. But I would try to go to a broader, higher dimensional graph to look at how we cluster cohorts. Now, once we've done the cohort analysis, completely naive kind of cohort analysis, see who's actually close to who. Once we've done that, I think the thing I would be looking for then, the genomic analysis I would do within each cohort is actually on, you use a good word, like the psychotechnology. It would be on the basis of the people themselves and what those people are like and what their ways of relating to each other is like. Because I fundamentally, I think in the game, and you see this kind of in a lot of the game B sort of stuff, is that we really tried to think about the human connection, and the human connection is the architecture, right? The human connection graph and the human relational capabilities, that is the capability. And the best sense making I've gotten around this stuff is not through reading it's not like I read and subscribe to higher funded institutional sense making things. Like there's a $10,000 a month subscription to some like secret Uber, like, you know, best info in the world site or something like that. That's not how this works. It's because I'm connected to certain people who I trust very, very deeply. And they are connected to other people who they also trust and hold in high regard. And we, in fact, have a little bit of firewalls between each other. So when I get something that's a little bit weird, I'm going to check it out before I send it to other people. And this looks very, very much like a brain neuronal graph. It's not rocket science. It's neuroscience, I guess, right? It's just about having high trusted connections. It's about having a human network. And no technology supplants the human network, right? So I think there's a deep thing I would be looking at there, is that I would be looking for figuring out a way to create that large high dimensionality cohort analysis, and then within each cohort doing the genomic analysis of their, by genomic I mean their patterns of interaction. How do the individuals there, you know, think and relate to each other?
Cool. Amy, you had a question?
Sure. So I live in New York, and I've been kind of struck by two different types of, I felt like people weren't taking this seriously in the beginning, and now I think that they are very much like, masks, we have to wear masks, and that is going to save us all. And there's something that is very untethered to the idea of an autonomous choice, and yet there's also something that's very tethered to the idea of group choice being almost subconscious or subliminal, where it's like there's this thing that undergirds people's choice making that kind of, I don't find it very, very conscious on a lot of people's parts, because people
Mm-hmm.
still don't social distance, even though they were asked here. So I'm wondering about like the social consequences of making unpopular choices, and whether or not you're kind of vectoring toward a modality of self-sovereignty, kind of to hell with social consequences, or maybe social consequences aren't as important as individual choice making. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I see. I'm going to take a couple multiple approaches to your question there and to your observations. There's a term that my physics mentor back in the day used to say. It was like he would always use terms like this problem or this particular exercise, whatever, separates the men from the sheep, right? As sort of a phrase. And I think this particular consequential decision, it's separating the men from the sheeple, right? There's people who are going to look to the herd and be like, well, what's everyone's got masks, so shit, I gotta be putting a mask on, right? Why do I put a mask on? I don't know, right? Like everyone's buying organic, I'm gonna buy organic too. Wait, what does organic mean? Oh, everyone's doing blah, 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 I'm gonna do blah, 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 whatever, that modality of sheeple, and I hate to just like amplify just cheap right-wing soundbite kind of things, but it really is the appropriate term in this case, right? It is people falling back into a decision-making mode that is looking to the herd. And this applies in all places too. Like I work in the tech industry, right? And in technology, you have the curve of adoption, and you have to cross the chasm. And in the lump of people around the standard, around the mean, those people make decisions. They make IT buying decisions, technology decisions on the basis of what everyone in their industry is doing, not on the basis of themselves feeling like they have the ability to vet, is this good or not? It's just like, well, everyone else in our industry is doing AI now, I guess we gotta go buy some AI, right? And so that same thing is just, I think, an unfortunate aspect of where humanity, Homo sapiens in sort of modernity in a technological society, that's just where we're at. And it is primitive and it sucks. And I would hope that my great-grandchildren have something better, but that's just where we're at, right? And if you're interested in this topic, if you look at the work of Simondon or Ellul, E-L-L-U-L, these guys talk a lot about this kind of thing, that as a society gets more and more complex, there's just a taller ladder to climb to even get to a point where you can have agency and meet and feel like, okay, I'm informed enough to make a real decision about this, right? I mean, even like with this coronavirus stuff, I'm seeing some of these things around there being specific parts of the genome, four places in particular that correspond to HIV. And these are not point things that would have been inserted in a random, it's exceptionally unlikely that this randomly naturally occurred. So there is now starting to become signal that from a couple of different places that I'm seeing that there was actual genomic engineering that inserted things into the genome here. And there's legitimate reasons for, not for bioweapons research, but for actual vaccine research, why you would do this, okay? So, but I mean, I'm not a geneticist, right? I mean, I can, my software is used in genomics, but I'm not a geneticist myself. So I've got to take that and send it off to a couple of my friends who are knowledgeable about this sort of thing. So that's what I mean, that the tower of modernity is so tall, most people can't get up there. Most people can barely do like high school algebra. So they're going to fall back to tribal sense-making systems. Like, what is everyone else doing? I'm gonna do what they do. So it's not necessarily an intrinsic, like, complete failure to say, oh, you guys are just doing tribal sense-making, to hell with your tribal sense-making, I'm gonna go figure this out on my own. In a lot of cases, you can't figure it out on your own. You don't even have the data, right? There's spy satellites that have been looking at IR signatures in Wuhan and all these other places. And those spy satellites, the people operating them, have a lot more information than you do. So this is the kind of thing that I think it's hard to make a blanket statement, right? That going and forging on your own is the right thing. But certainly what you should do, this is the one thing that I will say, you should connect to other people who are not afraid to be iconoclastic, who are not afraid to venture far away from the herd, because they know when they come back, the herd will still welcome them. And this is the topic of it's a deep topic. I've not actually done any podcasts on it or any writing on it outside of a few Facebook posts, but it is the core struggle of human civilization, is how do we create a tribe mentality and a tribal coherence mechanism that also treats outcasts with respect when they return as genius. Basically, how do we create greater discernment at an institutional level between geniuses and assholes? How do we hold the liminal door open so we can say, yeah, that person's blowing a lot of stuff up and they're doing weird things, but oh, look, all of a sudden they built a rocket and now we have satellites, right? Or, oh, that person's doing all these terrible things. Holy crap, they're going to kill us all. We need to like kill them right now, right? You have to have this like long period of discernment as an institution. Most of our institutions ground that window to nothing, right? If you step off outside of the norms, you're done. There's no such thing as shaman. And so the idea that we allow a place for shaman to come back and lead us to the next across the adaptive valley, because you hear in Game B people talking about adaptive valley a lot. The weird idiot that takes the tribe across adaptive valley looks like a weird idiot until they come back with all these goods from the other side, right? So how do we hold open that discernment? And so I think in your question hits upon that in a very interesting way, because what you want to do is find better friends. Find groups of people that will support you as you go off and do weird things, right? And who, if they all start putting masks on, or not to point, if they all start planting victory gardens, you should probably start planting a victory garden too, or move to some place where you have land and fresh water to plant a victory garden, right? That's the kind of thing. Find a better tribe. And in this way, we're diffusing the Darwinian selection process of old broken institutional structures. And yes, there will be bloodshed, and yes, people will die. There's a great quote from a book by Ian Banks called The Algebraist, where one of the characters says to the other, in the best of times, the wheels of history are indifferent to blood and to the blood of the common man. And the guy says, in the best of times? And he says, in the worst of times, they're lubricated by it. You know, that I think is one of these things that we should all hold in our hearts right now, because we are going through a real crisis right now. And the bloodshed hasn't even begun. You know, the bloodbath that's going to happen when the economy starts again and everyone's out of lockdown, we realize centuries-long brand names have just evaporated into bankruptcy. There's some bad stuff that's going to happen. So I think right now, especially if you're in New York, find better friends, find a different group of people that you trust with a higher to do higher fidelity sense making.
Right. Rob Hudson, you had a question about Infinite Games.
Hi everyone. Thanks. Peter, the question I've got, and it was very early on in the conversation, I think you evoked to me this, the understanding around game theory and finite games, use the prisoner's dilemma. So, and you then made reference to lots of different finite games, whether it's who gets to college or who gets the girl or whatever it is. All of that sort of stuff is fundamentally finite game. And what I suspect that we are consciously driven by finite games, but potentially propositional is that we're driven by infinite game, the infinite game, which is a lot less conscious. It's subliminal, as many people have talked about. And what I'm seeing is the crisis is naturally allowing that deeper agency of wanting and needing to play the infinite game of cooperation. A win-win cooperative games is starting to emerge. So that was one question. Really, is that? I mean, it's very interesting that we think we live in our heads and it's a conscious mind, but it's a peanut in comparison with what's really going on underneath. So we have no choice from that point of view. What's your thoughts on that?
That's a really interesting observation, because I think there's my thing in talking about meaning was really tied to this concept. There is an infinite amount of meaning to be had, right? It's sort of almost it's sort of like ties to Thomas Jefferson's thing about, if I light your mind with if I light your candle with mine, doesn't diminish my flame, right? The kinds, the really sad and tragic thing is that if we can get everyone, if we can up-level everyone to a heart space and a head space where they're solving for sufficiency, and then you realize there's better modes of interaction to yield more and more better things for everyone. But if we create institutions, infrastructures, from ontological and metaphysical infrastructures to actual physical infrastructures, if we create these things that reinforce a finite game competition, then we make bullshit as if decision making, we make that feel consequential when really everyone's just fighting for scraps. And so I agree with you that there is the infinite game that we should try to get everyone to play. there's an opportunity for that, and it's rooted in meaning and meaningful decision making and deep human relationships, things like that. And there's an infinite amount of that to go around, right? There's actually, we have an embarrassment of riches. And I first had that, I personally, just as a personal side note, I had that experience back in like 94 when I first got on Usenet, and I was like, there's so much. Like I went from BBS culture to Usenet, and there's a lot more Usenet than there was just a few BBS forums, right? And I was like, oh my God, I could just spend the rest of my life connecting with people and talking to people and learning from them and all these things. And that sense, now how many websites are there? There's like 10, right? We went from like an infinity of Usenet. Okay, a lot of it was weird trash, but still went from that to like, oh, everyone visits the same 10 websites, right? And so there's this thing where if we don't up-level the human organism, if we don't create infrastructures, and by infrastructures, I mean societies like this, efforts like this, things like this, that help people to up-level, then we can be given the best infrastructure and technology and tools, and we will still create crappy, finite games out of them. It's interesting you mentioned college as one of those things. College should be a place, can you imagine the privilege of having a place where you can just be fed and just read books, right? Just talk to people who are smarter than you with wonderful equipment to do amazing experiments. You could just do that. Like, wow, that's amazing. But we turned it into a shitty finite game of credential certification. Like that's complete crap, right? So even given all of these things, given the multi-billions of dollars that have been plunked down into college campuses and everything in these buildings, we still can't seem to get, even in those most intellectual of places, this flip over into, let's play an infinite game here. Right? Let's solve for how many students we can educate to a minimum level every year and have that be the race versus how many Nobel Prize winners we have in our faculty. Why does someone race that way, right? How many people have the most extension education programs? And oh, by the way, Harvard, instead of building another $500 million building somewhere in Massachusetts, you can go and literally educate and feed 20 villages somewhere in some third world country. Like that would be much better. That would literally be much better. But it wouldn't get you the credentials. It wouldn't get you the flair, right? So my point in all of this is that the opportunity to live meaningful lives, to build societies that encourage people to live meaningful and abundant lives is all there. That's why I think the Game B sort of proto-B movement is starting to pick up steam because people realize we could do this, right? This is a thing we need to do. Because we could just keep running down the Game A paths of creating bigger and bigger and more and worse finite games. But the other thing I will say is that the Game A thing and the finite games, this actually does segue into the second thing I was going to talk about, the phase 2 of what I was talking about, which was Moloch. And so on Slate Star Codex, there's a brilliant exposition of Scott Alexander about Meditations of Moloch. And it really is just this reflection of the reason why things are the way they are is because we keep making them the way they are. And Brett Weinstein talks about this as a David and Goliath thing. I have a Medium blog post called "Why Do I Capitalize the E in Establishment?" And this is 2.5 years ago. Why capitalize the E in establishment? Because I was talking about being anti-establishment. And the idea here is that the system and the game of the world is actually just a game. And this is the other really interesting thing about coronavirus. If everyone actually steps back and pauses and has to make intentional, consequential decisions, well, you start from a point of sufficiency. Do I have food, water, utilities? Are my children safe? Are my parents safe? Like, that's where you start with. And then you're like, well, what do I need beyond that? And now, so basically, it's like if you switch from one mode to another, then if everyone switches to other mode, there's no need for the previous mode. It's not like there's men in back rooms like doing like this, I mean, like, oh, we'll pull these levers and like reprogram everyone with 5G. That's not how it works, right? When we have emergent structures that are self-sustaining, attractors as we call them, right, in mathematics and dynamical systems, it's like if you ever seen like a dust devil kind of swirling across the desert, at some point it runs out of steam and it evaporates. It's like, where did it go? The air is all still there. The dust particles are all still there and they're kind of floating down. It's all still there, but it just is a different configuration, right? And so what happens is if you have the stigmergetic, you've seen the, what are they called? The murmurations, right? All these birds swarming, flying in formation and stuff. And every bird is making a local decision relative to the other birds. And when you net that out, it becomes this aggregation that swarms and has almost an organic life to itself. But if you could freeze and blind every bird for like 2 seconds, it would just, boom, instantly evaporate. right? Because they would all make different, or you've seen those things when a big gust of wind comes, if it comes from the same direction and hits all of them, the whole thing actually responds like a sail. It's just absolutely fascinating to watch these things. Human civilization is the same thing, right? And so to Raya's point about like climate change, look, we just totally solved climate change. People just don't travel anymore. All right. You see, like now there's a saying in India, they can all of a sudden see the Himalayas again for the first time in decades. Right. So when you have, like, we can all just be like, wait a second, do I really have to go to that business trip? I didn't. I was still able to conduct business. Right. So there's a thing that the system of the world, Moloch, it continues because we keep doing it. And all it takes, and what we've learned with coronavirus, this is the really interesting generalized point to take away from it, is that a sufficiently large crisis of some duration, a consequential choice imposed on everyone with a lag or a gap of a certain amount of time, more than a day, but probably less than a year, 2 weeks seems to be enough. With that, you can burp, you can hiccup, you can evaporate Moloch. That is, for me, and we have like just a few minutes left, but for me, that's the interesting thing about the consequential gap. It presents liminality to everyone, and all of a sudden, boom, right? So game B, I've never felt better about the prospects for game B. I've never felt better about the possibility of us actually being able to, within my lifetime, make significant fundamental change with regard to sustainability and putting humans back in that sustainable development zone. Because it's clear that everyone now has had a moment. It's like a glitch in the matrix, but everyone glitched at once, and you realize, wait, it wasn't just me dreaming that I was in this little pod suspended with some robots around me. We all saw that, right? Like, that is amazing. So, yes. All right.
We'll pause there. And I just felt great excitement hearing you say that, Peter.
Good.
Like a fuck yeah energy. Yeah, one thing I like about you is just listening to you and talking with you. There's like many different tree branches of conversations and questions just arise. So I'd love to have you back at the STOA for another session like this.
Love to, yeah.
And so I'll make some closing thoughts in a moment, but do you have any closing thoughts yourself?
No, I've been doing a lot of talking. I just want to thank you for doing this and for hosting me and having me here. I want to thank everyone for coming here and giving me your attention, and also having such wonderful comments here and seeing in the chat.
Great.
Yeah, thank you all.
Cool. Thanks so much, my friend, for coming out today. Thanks everyone for the excellent questions. The next two events coming up today, we have Yancey Strickler, the co-founder of Kickstarter. He's coming, I think it's, let me just get the time. He has 7 p.m. Eastern time at Self-Awareness in a Crisis. He's going to do a workshop on his bentoism. We have like about 100 people RSVP for that, so it's going to be quite interesting how we're going to manage it. And followed, he's the warm-up act to Colin Moore's Existential Dance Party that's happening at 8:30 p.m. And I fully expect Peter Wang to be there so we can get the dance moves on. So you just RSVP on the website.
Okay.
And the STOA right now is based off the gift economy. I'm viewing it as a gift for all of us to freely use in this time of need. If you're inspired to give a gift to the STOA, just go to the website and look at the gift economy at the bottom of the page for more information. All right. So thanks everyone for coming out today.
Thank you, everyone.